It's the 2nd of December 2025. World Power. You'll see a flicker there coming in. That's the shadow flicker of Ra wind farm. On the video of Ukraine, Anthony McCall, I don't know, is he a real Irish or maybe he's a Ukrainian living here. Anthony McCall talks about Russian aggression in Ukraine. He talks about the revolution of dignity in 2014. That was to overthrow the democratically elected Viktor Yanukovych. Isn't he Victor? Yeah. That's to overthrow him. And Victoria Nuland went out and gave sweets and encouragement to it. That was an American-backed revolution to overthrow the democratically elected government. Yanukovych wanted to have a neutral Ukraine prospering between all interested and let everyone live and let live. He was overthrown. He talks about Russian aggression. Well, I had a friend, and I know he's still around, and I know him very well, and he was in Ukraine on a mission. He does engineering, and in Odessa, and he personally witnessed Russian people coming out to protest night after night, and eventually the state told the police to stand down, and a crowd of Nazis came in and drove them into a high building and burnt them alive. Now, Anthony McCall, you tell me that's not right. That is correct, because I have a personal witness, a person who would swear to it. Moreover, the Ukrainians killed 17,000 people in the Donbass and the Luhansk, and the objective of it was to drive them out. They didn't want them there. So then he talks about NABO and the anti-corruption, but he says there's fierce debate over whether it should have any teeth. So here you have him admitting that they don't want to stop corruption in Ukraine. And them running off with 140 billion euros, and the EU wants to give them that much more. Now there's a video online, and I'll post a link to it, from Dr. Lothar Schroeder. Lothar, and he's an East German, lived in the former East Germany, and he's still there, I think, or around there, and he's a historian. And he explains it all, and I'll post the link. The problem is it's a half-an-hour video. None of these things are easily compressed. This idea that the Ukraine war started on the 22nd of February 2022 is a complete and utter lie. And in an election campaign I took part in last year, Deputy Brendan Smith, the Fianna Fáil deputy for Cavan, said it was all Russia's fault and Putin was pure evil. That is a degree of ignorance. That is a degree of country bumpkin ignorance. That is totally false. And it shows you the level of indoctrination he gets as a TD in Dáil, Eireann. Everything was going on grand in Ukraine. And they overthrew the government. Now, the history of Ukraine, I saw a documentary on it years ago, easily 10 years ago, before it was controversial. The Vikings left Scandinavia. They hadn't half enough land. There was no land in it. They had very little. They moved out to Ireland. You know the story. They occupied Dublin. We still have their descendants living here. And over in Iceland, occupied it, and Greenland. And in fact, they call Ireland Papa in Iceland because so many of the Vikings interbred and had children and brought wives over and slaves and everything else. But the Vikings also went down into Europe and into France, and they came back up into Britain, and that's where you get this chivalry and knights in shining armour. Tony Benn once said that the British monarchy and the British establishment is really Viking, Norman. And the Normans are in Ireland, and we have them here. We know them well. They're our neighbours and everything else. They took over all the good land, and you'll see castles all over the place in Kells, in Clonmelon. There's castles everywhere. Big kind of old castles. There's 2 in RD. Norman castles. In RD in County Louth. So anyway, they moved then into Europe, and they moved down across France, and they wanted to go to see what was in where Ukraine is, and they actually brought the boats across the mountains using rollers, wooden rollers. They pulled the boats across dry land from one sea to the other, or one lake to the other, and they landed in Kiev, and the fella in charge decided he was running the place. Well, it was part of Russia then. There was no real clear divide. And he decided he'd pick a religion, and he brought in the Muslims, and they told him that he'd have to pray every Friday and that he couldn't eat bacon or drink alcohol. And he told him, you get your stuff and get out of here and don't come back. Ran them out. The next thing he did was he brought in the Catholics, the Roman Catholics, and I can't remember exactly what their problem was. They said he could have a drink, he could eat pork. What I think it was, he'd have to bear allegiance to the Pope in Rome. He'd have to do what the Pope said. And he told them, the door's over there and don't ever come back. Then the Orthodox come over and they gave them their view of Christianity, and he thought it was very good. And he adopted the Orthodox Church, and that's the church in Russia, and that's the church, that's where it originated, in Kiev, by a Viking warlord. That's the truth. That's what that documentary said when there was no controversy about this at all, or controversy. Roll on. It was part of Russia. The Crimea was part of Russia. The British fought a war in 1853 or thereabouts over it. You know the song, the Kerry Recruit. About 4 years ago, I was digging the land with me brogues on me feet and me spade in me hand. And I said to myself, what a shame for to see. What a fine strapping lad digging turf round Tralee. And away it goes. He ended up losing his leg and his arm and his eye. And he retired back with the woman on 10 pennies a day. So that's the song. That's the Crimean War. Brits stuck in there as well. The Brits hate Russia. They always hate Russia. The hatred of Russia can never be extracted out of the British. All political views have it. I'm not so sure about Reform UK. There might be a bit less. I don't know. But it's there. Okay, that's the story. So yes, Stalin did misbehave. He went into the Crimea and he abused the Tartars and he shipped them all away off to Russia. Not a very nice thing to do, and he left a taste of bitterness there. But that Putin then took over after Gorbachev, after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and they promised that NATO wouldn't move in there, but they never meant any of it. So the thing about Anthony McCall is this: Russian aggression, he calls it. Well, as I said, my friend saw them killing Russian people in Odessa, and 17,000 were killed in an effort to drive Russian-speaking people out. And that would be the same as if the nationalists in the north rose up against the Protestant population and tried to kill them all, and the government stood by and gave no assistance. That's essentially what it was. So I'd like Anthony McCall to answer that. Is that true or false? He talks about a revolution of dignity. What took Victoria Nuland over there? What took Boris Johnson over there? To get Russia destroyed, to grab the resources of Russia, to surround Russia with NATO. They tried to take the Russian port of Sebastopol. I think that's the name of it. It's in the Crimea anyway. There's a lot of Russians living there, a lot of Russians there, and keeping that port. It's a military and a commercial port, and it gives access to the Black Sea and access down into through Turkey into the Mediterranean Sea. That tried to choke off Russia. NATO deliberately tried to choke that off and take it off Russia. They want Russia not to be able to come out on the southern flank at all. What's dignified about that? Ukraine could work away from Odessa, export its grain and do all, but no, they cooperated in NATO, destroying Russia. Anthony McCall talks about NABO and SAPO, the anti-corruption agencies, and he says that there's fierce debate over whether they should do their job or not, or do their work or not. Why is there fierce debate? Because the Ukrainians are corrupt. And there's no way you're going to take the corruption out of the Ukrainians. And if there are elections in Ukraine, they will always vote corrupt. Forever and a day. If it was to be 50,000 years from now, you'll never get corruption out of Ukraine. Now, a lot of people post there about Ireland. That's a separate story. There's a wee bit of hope in Ireland that some way we might. I believe that the day could well. You don't know what it will happen in this world. Things are changing. The socialist cause is collapsing. But I believe that we might get a story where we would get retribution on Enda Kenny of Fine Gael, Leo Varadkar, Eamon Cabbagehead Ryan, Micheál Martin and Simon Harris, we could have some type of Nuremberg trials for those who did what they did, and also for the destruction of our environment. Now, we have a strong economy in Ireland so far. How long it sticks, it depends on President Trump and his attitude to the pharmaceuticals. Now, so that's the story there. Of the two, a decent person in Ukraine, in my humble opinion, was better with a neutral Ukraine. But you can't have a neutral Ukraine, because if you have an election, they'll vote for the corruption. And the corrupt politicians will take the money from the United States and Britain. And they'll always move towards the West. You can't have that. And Putin knows it. The democratic process cannot work in Ukraine. They're just too corrupt. They're more corrupt than most parts of Africa. And to hell with them. They're after making off with 145 billion euros. That Umeric, he is a Tartar from the Crimea. He has bullocks notions of going back and being a big fella in Crimea. He wants Russia out. One of their men, Minsk, has gone to Israel or Switzerland with a big bag of billions of money. Zelensky has his chest full. And they won't compromise in any way. This could have been all fixed by diplomacy and compromise, especially after Crimea was taken over. But they wouldn't yield, and they wouldn't yield. And the Europeans will refuse to speak to Putin. Viktor Orban went over last week and they condemned him, and he spoke to Putin. Meanwhile, would you believe it, bizarrely, Turkey has had a little boost in their application for membership of the EU. Are they mad in the head? Turkey controls shipping access into the Mediterranean. But if they went to stop it on Russia, Russia would take them out of it, I'd say. Now, the point is, Russia's not all perfect, nowhere's perfect. This is a lie. It's an absolute lie that Russia is the aggressor. The aggressor is the deep state of America, tied up with Britain and Europe to a lesser degree. Here we have Britain gearing up to fight Russia alongside an ally to the Germans. Excuse I was drinking tea here. Right? To fight Russia. And a few years ago, they were tied up with Russia to fight the Germans. Trump's cabinet has a certain amount of deep staters. But the bottom line is that the United States is still about half German blood. There's a good deal of British blood and a good deal of European. And they are warmongers. And they want the glory of war. And they won't stop till they get it. The French Prime Minister the French head military man has advised people to get ready for their kids coming home in boxes. And it's coming to Ireland quite soon. And one thing I think we can be relatively certain of in Ireland, even though we did well in the Spoil Vote campaign, there's still a hardcore of people in Ireland who will vote Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and they have it rigged that the independents will back them if they don't vote for them. So even if they vote independents, they still get Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. So there's the dilemma we're stuck in. So when you look at it one way and the other, you are better be independent, but if you can't be, I wouldn't fear the Russians coming into Ireland. They're not going to come in here, and they're not going to take over Britain. Who'd want them shower of dirty idiots? Who'd want them? Birmingham is a stinkhole. It's all Africans and Chinese and Pakistani and everything. Birmingham's gone. There's no English people over there. That's the way. And now they're trying to take away our coal fires, and they're tightening up the ratchet on everything that we want. They want to take our cars. They want to take everything. And still the paddy will win. Hey, give me a... Well, where's Fianna Fáil? 1, 2, 3. Ha! Okay, how's Fianna Fáil, man? And then, okay, Fine Gael, man. And they'll meet Hunter in the door. I vote Fine Gael. I vote Fianna Fáil. That'll fix it. And them all the one soused pigs above in Dublin. And the sad part is the independents are just as bad. So we'll see you back soon for something else. I think I've answered Tony McCall there. If he wants to debate me face to face, we'll go ahead. But that video that I've told you there from that particular man, Lothar Scruder, tells it exactly as it is. He's a historian that explains the whole thing. They don't want to give Russia a say at all. They want to topple its government. They want to grab all its resources and then dictate to them about DEI. Turkey has been told, oh, well, wait, now, if you're going to join the EU, you'll have to have diversity, equity and inclusion. And your airline pilots will all have to be gay, overweight, obese, challenged women. That's what they're going to be told. And then they'll put these type of ones in charge of the military in Ireland and in the UK, and they'll have a pencil in a war cabinet out on the behind the lines, and they'll be dictating where your son or daughter goes into the meat grinder. That's exactly what's happening in Ukraine. They're driving the young and not so young Ukrainians into their deaths with a stroke of a pen in Britain and in the United States. And our people will support that. Anthony McCall, I challenge you to a full, complete debate on the Ukraine situation. Bye-bye. Good luck. Thank you.